Kid stuff. Oh, shit. So we had a granddaughter born yesterday.
Oh, Mazel Tov.
Yeah, so we get a Mazel Tov.
Wow, is that Alma's
That's
son?
Alma. Alma gave birth to a girl.
That's amazing.
I was there today.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so they didn't give a name yet.
Didn't somebody just have a baby?
Yeah, Adel, my other daughter. Who's joining us? I see Zahava online. I'm guessing Yael also. I'm not sure who else is there. And of course my mother, who watches every week. She's back from traveling. Chaim. And as I was saying before, Noga and I and the whole family, Carlos, Shalom Aleichem, get a Mazel Tov, because our oldest daughter, Alma, gave birth yesterday. Pretty crazy. It was a long day. Well, Hashem. So, Koach, I don't know if you have the right volume. We're now on lesson, Hey, in volume 2. Right? I don't know if you took the right one.
Volume 1.
Volume 1. So we're now, we finished that lesson, and now we're moving on to volume 2, and we're doing lesson Hey. So the reason that I picked lesson Hey is because if I was to summarize Rebbe Nachman's Torahs into one Torah, it would be don't give up. Then there's other things that come along with it, but that's really Rebbe Nachman's lesson, like his main lesson, don't give up. You know, that the convert comes to Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Hillel, and says to him, teach me the whole Torah standing on one foot. And he says, love your neighbor like you would love yourself. And the rest is commentary. And then that in the Reform movement, that's where they would leave it. And then the rest is go and learn. So when Rebbe Nachman says, don't give up, you have to add in now go and learn, which is what we're doing. We're doing the part of going and learning. I have to be so careful. This is my new phone. It's very sensitive. Last week I touched it and I turned off the video. And I lost, everybody was watching, they figured it out, but not last week, 2 weeks ago. So the sound should be better, Bezrat Hashem, and the video should be better, and everything should be better. So don't give up, right? That's Rebbe Nachman's lesson, and he says it in the words, V'ein shum yiyush ba'olam klal, that there is no despair. Now, I have despaired. So factually, Rebbe Nachman is not right, because there is despair. Obviously, there's despair. But that's not the meaning of the lesson, that there's no despair. It means you don't ever reach the place of despair. Even if you think that you've reached the place of despair, you're ready to give up, know that you haven't really reached the lowest level, and you can still lift yourself back up. Even if every time you get back up, you get knocked down again, still get up. That's basically his lesson. Then he's saying, okay, now how do you get up, and what do you get up, and after you get up, and what do you do with all that? That's the rest of the Likutey Moharan, more or less. And so I decided to pick one of the lessons specifically on chizuk, like on giving yourself strength, in getting up and dealing with the challenges that Hashem sends you. And it's a very long lesson. Turns out I didn't know when we started. It's the longest lesson in Likutey Moharan. So this is lesson 5 in part 2 of Likutey Moharan. We only did the first section. And I have a note here. This is L'ilui Nishmat Akiva ben Reuven and Chasha Shifra Halevi, which is of course Akiva that passed away. What was his last name? You know what I'm talking about, Akiva? The guy that lived in the neighborhood?
Yeah.
What was his last name?
Goldberg.
Goldberg, thank you. He was known as a drummer, a computer guy, very into being a Levi, and he passed away something like a month ago, so 53. So I decided for now I'm going to dedicate the lessons to him. Okay, and he also used to watch the lessons. Yeah, I would say, Shalom Aleichem to anybody who's watching in the future, and he would write, I'm in the future. That was like his joke. Okay, so what is this lesson that we're learning? I'll just go back to the beginning line. He starts off with blowing the shofar, Tiku b'chod shofar, b'keser yom chagenu. That's the quote that he starts off with, and he says, Ha'ikar shekol haTorah v'mitzvot hu ha'emunah. The main aspect of the Torah and all of the mitzvot is emunah. Ki shehi yesod kol haTorah kula. I forgot to mention David, who watches every week as well. So the basis, the purpose of the whole Torah is to bring a person to have emunah. Kol mitzvotecha emunah. Right, that's a quote from Tehillim that we've read many times in the Likutey Moharan, where he says, all of the mitzvot are coming to teach you emunah. The whole life of Torah is coming to teach you emunah. I'm going to skip over what we learned last week. We're going to summarize it in a sentence in just a second. What does that mean? The whole Torah is coming to teach you emunah. So we basically come into this world without a handbook, without a guidebook. There's the guidebook to the galaxy. That's what it's called? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I knew that Koach would know that. There's that. There's no Hitchhiker's Guide to being a Jew and a mensch in the galaxy, in this galaxy. Chaya. Okay. And so life can get confusing now. When you're a kid, you kind of have some direction. Your parents tell you, get good grades, you get a good job, and your life will be perfect. Most kids don't get good grades. Many people don't get good jobs, and even if they do, their life is not perfect. We discover that the nice thing that we were told as kids is not reality. And when we're on our own, and we have to buy toilet paper, and we have to brush our own teeth, and we have to figure out how to pay the bills and how to do whatever we have to do, we end up really struggling with being in this body, in this world, in this life. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. So Rebbe Nachman says, I get that. And he says, you just don't know that the Torah, all the mitzvot, are coming to teach you emunah. Kol mitzvotecha emunah. So he said, it's all there. We just have to, I don't like the word unpack, but it's really what it is. We just have to slowly understand it, classify it, go deep into it, get it. And then we also have our human nature. We have the Yetzer Hara, which says to us, the Yetzer Hara is so perfect. Either you're doing things right, you give tzedakah, This guy comes to me this morning, asked for tzedakah, and I was feeling really generous. So I gave much more than I normally give. And what do I hear in the back of my head? You're such a tzaddik. That's my Yetzirah. Say, you're such a tzaddik. You get to shul on time. You start the minyan every morning. You're such a tzaddik. That's the Yetzirah. Now, on the other hand, the Yetzirah says, you want to... See, I'm a vegetarian, so I rarely ever eat meat. I don't eat meat, but I like eat from a meat grill, for example. A piece of fish from a meat grill like we had on Yom Ha'atzmaut. Then for 6 hours, I don't eat anything dairy. So, of course, my Yetzirah says, don't you want ice cream? Come on, you're a vegetarian. You always eat it. Oh, it's just a piece of fish. Come on, you didn't actually eat the meat. So the Yetzirah is there to knock us off all the time. And the Yetzirah is always looking for when we have a downfall in our emunah. Because it's kind of maintaining a vibration. If we lose maintaining that vibration, the whole thing just falls apart. We say, I'll screw this and screw that and screw everything, and I don't care about my teeth, and I don't care about my health, and I don't care about my relationships, and I don't care about my electric bill, and I don't care about anything. It can all burn, and I don't care. And the Yetzirah comes and says, and on top of that, you're a loser. And that really brings you down. And Rebbe Nachman is saying, the mitzvot are there in order to lift you up, to help you through all of the tests in this world. And that's what this lesson is about. So he begins and he says there are people that suffer from afflictions that nothing can fix. If the person is sick, they suffer from illness that no medication can heal, no treatment can heal. And then he goes even further. He says, not even davening heals the person, not even giving tzedakah heals the person, not even the merit of our ancestors heals the person. Nothing can heal the person. And he says, and why does that happen? Because the person has a lack of emunah. And if you have a lack of emunah, then you can try everything in the world and it still won't work. That's where we got up to last time. לאחר שביאר מדוע אלו שאמונתם נפגמה סובלים חולאים, after he explained why those whose faith is blemished suffer from afflictions, ולא מועיל להם רפואה, תפילה, זכות אבות, וגם לא צעקה ונגיחה. And it doesn't help them to take medication, or to daven, or the merit of their ancestors, and not even shouting or sighing, because we had a lesson many years ago, Rebbe Nachman says, a good sigh can be better than a whole day of davening. So, like a really good sigh where you let out all of the stress and anxiety and pain, that's a type of tefillah, it's a type of prayer. And you can do it in your davening, just whenever you feel like it, you come, just let it all go. So he says, let's say the person reaches the point where they're sighing, that's their prayer, and that doesn't help them either. It's because of a lack of faith. It's going to explain that the way to fix this, hu al yedei chizuk v'gidul ha'emunah, is through strengthening and increasing one's emunah, hana'asim al yedei etzot, which is done through, Yael is a good sire, shikoch, which is done through advice, etzot. Etzot is advice, but here it means more than advice. So we're on bet. V'atikun lezeh, the fixing for this, which we mentioned before, that a person suffers, and not everything they do doesn't help them, שצריכים לחתור ולמצוא המים שמשם גדילה האמונה. That a person has to dig deep and find the water in the place that grows in the place of emunah. So we know that in California, I listened to a radio documentary about this years ago when I was in the ceramic studio. They have a drought. I don't know if they still have a drought, but back then they had a drought. And there's always water. It depends on how far down you dig. So people had wells, and they would dig down, and the wells would dry out, so they'd have to dig deeper and dig deeper. But every time you dig, like every whatever meter it is, it costs a certain amount of money, and these wells were getting to be very, very expensive. And you might discover water, but you didn't know how long the water would last. So he's saying the same thing. You have to dig wells to reach the waters that are where the emunah is inside of you. Inside of everybody, on some level, there's emunah. Even the greatest atheist, 100% has emunah. The biggest Soviet atheist, like I don't know how much more extreme I can get than Soviet atheist, has emunah. They have emunah in their atheism. They believe there's no God. And that's a faith. I mean, how do you know? Just like people would say to me, well, prove to me there's God. So the answer is, prove to me there isn't. No one knows. Like, proof. There's no proof. I can prove the koach is here. Probably philosophically we could get to the point where we don't think we're even here. You can say that Arya is here. I'm here. I know that I'm here. Do I know that God is here? I don't know that God is here because God is creating everything. We had a whole lesson about the chalal panoi, the empty vacant space that Hashem creates, and creates it in a way where there's absolute free will and enables us to make choices that completely count, which is why there's good and there's evil. We can explain that. Everyone has emunah. So somewhere in that emunah are the waters that you have to dig into and tap into. And these waters are an aspect of advice. That is the 613 advices that are given in the Torah, meaning the 613 mitzvot that are given in the Torah. And the main thing is the person keeps the mitzvot in a true and honest, sincere way. Meaning that you're doing the mitzvot not because that's how you grew up, and not because that's how you just think that it should be done, but you're doing it from a place of being honest with yourself. You can do a mitzvah that you're not being honest about in order to bring yourself to the point where you will be honest. Right? You have to be doing mitzvot, and you have to know the mitzvot in order to reach the place of doing it from a place of sincerity. But it's not enough to just do the mitzvot. You have to know that you have to reach a place of sincerity. That's the goal. That when you give tzedakah, you're not giving tzedakah just because it says in the Shulchan Aruch that I have to give tzedakah. So I'm going to give tzedakah. Or you're not going to daven in the morning because it says in the Shulchan Aruch I have to daven in the morning. You're going to daven in the morning because it says in the Shulchan Aruch, but you're going to daven in the morning because your soul needs to speak to Hashem. When you reach the point where your soul needs to speak to Hashem, then you're doing the mitzvah from a place of emet. And that's the goal. And then, when you reach a place of, taking this example, davening shachrit, because your soul needs to have a conversation with Hashem, then the mitzvot become something that strengthens your emunah. When you're giving tzedakah, not just because you're supposed to give tzedakah, but because your soul needs to connect with the master of the universe who's creating the world all the time, not through words, but through an action of taking your sweat and blood and your self-sacrifice and giving it selflessly to your fellow Jew that needs that money at that point. When you do it because you have to do it, that's one level. But when you do it because you want this connection with Hashem, that's the higher level. When you do it out of true love for your fellow Jew, someone comes and they say, listen, I really need help. So you say, look, I don't have much money. I can give you 5 shekels. I can give you 10 shekels. That's what I can give you. But you do it from a place of really love. If I had all the money to pay off your debt, I would do it right now, and here's the money. That's doing the mitzvah from a place of emet. And once you do that, it starts to strengthen your emunah. I have a friend who, for a while, was having real financial difficulties. And I noticed he would come to shul, and he would put 10 agorot in the tzedakah box. Sometimes he would even take the 10 agorot and put it in the box and pull it out at the same time. Now I know that I noticed it because I'm observant, Michal Abraham. In the days when we used to have conversations, would say, "You're a very observant Jew. You observe something." So I observed it, and I knew that this is a guy who's struggling, and he's saying to Hashem, "I'm not giving you tzedakah until you give me money. I'm not going to struggle. I can barely buy food. I'm not giving tzedakah." The highest level, and I learned this from Ruti in the Shuk. Yeah, be careful with the table. You know who Ruti is in the Shuk? Well, she comes to our Shabbos table. You know Ruti.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so Ruti, I give her a lot of credit. I tell her all the time. She has 10 children, and they're all Haredi. And she had a period where she just had her own little breakdown, and her kids didn't want to talk with her. Now her kids are talking with her again. Her whole life is coming back together again. But this was a person who needed attention. Because they say in Hebrew, tsumi. Tzumet lev is attention. Tsumi is the nickname for it. She needed attention. So what did she do? She planted herself in the shuk. She's still there most days.
Mm-hmm.
Singing out loud.
Sitting in the middle.
Making a lot of noise. Now she has a cup. People give her tzedakah. And I only pass by there once or twice a day. And I've seen this many times. She gets up, she goes to another beggar, she says, "Give me your cup." The guy gives her his cup. She takes hers and pours everything in it, and takes whatever she has, gives it to the guy, and she says, "Hashem provides. I don't have to worry about anything." And then she'll tell me, like a day or two later, a guy came by and he gave me 1,000 shekels. All these crazy stories, yeah. And then she said, "I gave the 1,000 shekels away, somebody gave me 5,000 shekels." Now, this level of emunah it's kind of like on the ropes course where people would lean back and everyone would catch them. Mm-hmm. That leaning back into Hashem is the level of emunah, of doing a mitzvah from a place of emet. That's the point that we're supposed to get to, and that's how the whole Torah is really there to teach us emunah, because every mitzvah gives us that opportunity to lean into Hashem in the same way that Ruti is willing to give away all the money, not even worrying if it's going to come back. Not saying to Hashem, "I gave tzedakah, you're supposed to give it back within a certain amount of time. I'm testing you, I'm allowed to test you when it comes to tzedakah." Not even that. Simply from a place of reaching emunah and doing the mitzvot. And it's a very high level. But he says, that's what it's there for. That's what it's there for. So he said, "B'chinat etzot hainu tayav mitzvot etzot Torah." That is, so how does a person develop their faith? They need some type of advice. And what type of advice are they going to get? Advice in the form of mitzvot. She'ikah she'ikah me'emet. That the main thing is that you keep them in a true and sincere way. Mishum she'akadosh baruch hu tzivah v'lo pniyot lechavod u'shar hanaot. Because Hashem commanded us, without having any ulterior motives for honor or for deriving any pleasure from the mitzvot. Shemisham me'aetzot, that from there, from the etzot, from the advice, or from the mitzvot, gedela ha'emunah. That's where emunah grows. So I explained it to you in the examples that I gave, and that's what he's saying here. When Rebbe Nachman writes this stuff, he writes it in a very high-level code language, in a sense. The Tanya is written in even higher code language, which is why I think most people don't get the Tanya. Here, even though Rebbe Nachman is trying to bring it down, he's still writing it on a very high level. Then we have the Otei Or, who's explaining it with Rebbe Nassim's commentary, and then you have me, who's bringing it down to like the lowest level I possibly can, to make it like accessible to me and to everyone, that we can really understand what he's saying. If you were just to read this without understanding what we just talked about, it might not make so much sense. It would just be like, well, that's interesting, I don't really know what he's saying. But now you understand that he's saying all the mitzvot are there in order for you to build your emunah, and that's how you build your emunah, through the mitzvot, by doing the mitzvot in the most sincere way. The B'chinat HaKatuv, Odeh, as it's written in Yeshaya, Odeh Shimcha, Ki asite Pele, Eitzot Merachok emunah, omen. I will be thankful to in your name, because you made a wondrous thing. Advice from far, and emunah that fosters emunah, or something that fosters emunah. So that's the quote that's the text proof that he's using, for he's going to explain the rest. That through mitzvot, emunah grows. Because what are the eitzot? What is the advice? It's the Torah. V'tachlit Torah hi emunah. And the bottom line, the ultimate purpose of the Torah is to create emunah. That's the whole purpose. That's why we were given the Torah. Because you can live in this world your whole life and never have emunah, and you might have like a nice life physically. Especially if you're a Jew, you will be lacking spiritually in such a deep way. And the reason that we're here is in order to recreate this connection in a world where Hashem is vacant. The mitzvot are given as a tool to connect with Hashem, to create emunah. We know mitzvah comes from tzavta, which is pliers, which brings two extremes together. The finite, which is us, the infinite, which is Hashem. It's the bridge to connect with Hashem. That's what the mitzvah is. There are two types of advices, eitzot. Eitzot shemekabel me'acherim ve'eitzot la'atzmo. There's advice that you receive from others, and there's the advice itself. Shemotzi melibo eitzot la'atzmo ketzad leitnaheg. You can give yourself advice that you pull out from your heart in order to give yourself advice on how to behave. And this advice on how we need to behave is found within every person, deep in their heart. And now he's going to explain, how do we draw out the advice and how to behave that's hidden deep in our hearts. This advice is connected to the deep parts of the heart. Because advice is the part that's the most purified or clarified in understanding the heart. Meaning the heart understands what you're supposed to do better than anything. And so that's why the advice is the depth of the heart. Right? Each person knows that when you're facing a dilemma and you're not sure what to do, if you search deep in your heart and you have a clear mind and you're able to look inside of yourself, you can figure out what you should be doing. Right? Like a simple example of a person is dating somebody and they're not sure if it's the right person. They might be the perfect person on paper, but they look in their heart and their heart says, this is not the right person for me, and they know to move on. Or it might be the other thing, the person might say, this is the right person for me, even if they're not perfect on paper. The heart has a certain clarity, but you have to go deep into your heart in order to find it. That after all of the thinking and all of the reasoning, the advice is the bottom line, the main thing, meaning that the advice that comes from your heart is going to give you the answer. That is, when a person's faith is blemished and comes down to a low level, that it's not even effective. The sound of a person shouting that comes out from their mouth, meaning, you get to the point where you just say, oi! Or you, some other word, damn it, or whatever comes out of your mouth, just like, can't stand it anymore. Says, even that isn't going to help you. Shehu kol below dibur kanal, that this is a sound that comes out without any sound, without any speech, then you have to shout only from the heart. So a person shouts from their mouth, I'm so frustrated, I can't handle all this. He says, if that didn't help, you now have to shout just from your heart. Your heart is making the sound. This is the beauty of Rebbe Nachman. How does he come up with this stuff? It's incredible. Just your heart has to shout. And this shouting that comes out of your heart has to be the shouting of self-sacrifice. Of self-sacrifice meaning, I'll give you an example. Imagine you're serving people a meal and all the chairs on the table are taken, you give somebody your chair. All the plates are taken, you give somebody your plate. All the food is finished, you give somebody your food. Somebody else comes in, you say, I can't give you any food, there's no more food left, but I can give you some hot water. There's only one bag of tea. You wanted to drink it later on, you give it to the person. Somebody's tired, they say, can I sleep on the floor? You give them to sleep. Like this type of mesirut, that's mesirut nefesh. Now he says, when you're shouting from your heart, from a place of mesirut nefesh, you're reaching that place where you've spent everything that you have. There's nothing left inside of you, and that's what's shouting out to Hashem. It's that place of not despair, but yes, despair. Meaning, one more second and I'll reach despair. That's why I'm shouting from this deep place in my heart. A place of mesirut nefesh. B'chinat HaKetuv bechoban habayit, as it's written about the destruction of the temple. And Eicha, tza'ak libo el Hashem, his heart shouted out to Hashem. Shehu tza'akat halev levad, this is the shouting of the heart alone, bli kol, without any sound. Ki ka'asher hu nofel me'emunah, ein lo kli lahakil et yesodot eish mayim veruach. When a person's emunah is blemished and they've fallen in their emunah, they don't have a vessel to include the foundations of water, of fire, water, and air. Umemele ein lo dibor. And so then, as a result, the person doesn't have any speech. V'lachen tzarich litzok bli kol rak me'alev. And so a person has to shout without any noise, without any sound from their heart. B'bchinat HaKetuv miman akin karaticha Hashem. As it's written in Tehillim, we say in Hallel, from the depths I shout out to you. Me'umka deliba. What does it mean from the depths? It means from the deepest place of my heart. Me'omek halev. Ukshe tzo'ek me'omek halev ze b'chinat etzot. When a person shouts out to Hashem, cries out to Hashem from the deepest place in their heart, this is connected to etzot, advices. Kisham be'omek halev hu hamakom ha'etzah. There, in the deepest place of the heart, that's where there's clarity. That's the clarity that there isn't in your brain, in your intellect. There is that clarity in the heart. And when the heart shouts out, it's not shouting from a place of intellect. It's shouting from a place of knowing what advice to give you and how you should be behaving. It's coming from a purer place than your mind can reach when you shout out from your heart. When a person has something very specific that they want, I want Hashem this much money at this much time to pay for this thing. I need it, and you'll take care of it. Thank you, Hashem. That's, in general, that's not a good prayer. Maybe Hashem wants to give you much more money. Maybe He just wants to give it to you a little later. Maybe He wants to give you some more tzuras before He gives you the money. Who knows? But you can shout out to Hashem and say, Hashem, I'm suffering. I'm in pain. Hashem, help me. Those are prayers that come from the deepest place of the heart, and that's a place that comes from the place of advice. That deep waters, the advice that is in the heart of a person comes from a place of deep waters. So he's just bringing another text proof. הרי שעל ידי צעקה מעומק הלב, by crying out from the deepest places of your heart, מתגלות העצות שבלב האדם. It reveals the advice that's within the heart of a person. שמוציא מעצמו עצות טובות כיצד להתחזק באמונה. That it draws out from the person good advice in how to strengthen their emunah. וכיוון שהעצות אלו באות מעומק הלב, and since these types of advices are coming from the deepest parts of the heart, הן נקראות מים עמוקים. They're called deep waters, right? Because if you dig a hole, you dig a pit, a well, you're going to get to the deep waters. If you go into the deepest part of your heart, you're going to reach the place of emunah, the place where you're going to be able to strengthen yourself and give yourself advice, and that's coming from the same place like the deep waters underground. Hein elu ha-megadlot et ha'emunah. These waters are the waters that cause a person's emunah to grow. V'al ken kshe'ein mo'in kol tza'aka b'peh. And so, when shouting out to Hashem, crying out to Hashem from your mouth isn't effective, mechimat nefilat emunah, because you are not really on such a high level of having emunah. Azai tzichim litzok min halev levad. Then you have to shout out just from the heart, bli kol, without any sound. Rak me'umka deliba, just from the deepest place of the heart. V'alidei zeh mitgalin heitzot belibo. Then the advice that's hidden within your heart will be revealed. Shel hatzoek ba'atzmo kana, that shouts out to Hashem, as mentioned above, sheim b'chinat mayim amukim etzad chulei b'leiv ish, that the deep waters hold advice in a person's heart. Any questions yet? Continue. Okay, we'll keep going. We're just going to finish this one section, and that's it for tonight. Which is one more, like, a third of the page here. And through the advice that's revealed in the world, that this thing is called a drawing down a consciousness or ideas. So he's saying there's the advice that comes from the heart, and there's the advice that everybody can give one another. You know, there's all kinds of advice online, all kinds of advice from friends, all kinds of advice from different people. There's two types of advice. There's just practical advice, and then there's the advice that a person merits to get, that's true advice, that helps a person to be saved from the tests of this world, and also causes the person to come closer to Hashem. וכיצד יוכל לקיים את תרי"ג המצוות שהן התרי"ג העצות, and this is how a person can keep the 613 commandments, which the commandments are essentially 613 different ways of growing in the challenges of this world. When you know this, then your emunah grows. Before he said, here, this is the quote exactly here, B'bchinat etzot merachok emunah omen. This advice that comes from far away, it helps you to grow your emunah. This is something I was trying to explain to one of my teenage kids. Cycles create cycles. So when a person decides to follow an unhealthy cycle, smoking, drinking, not using their time properly, it leads to more of that. And when a person says, I'm going to wake up early, I'm going to daven, I'm going to eat healthy, I'm going to choose healthy things, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to learn Torah, it causes healthy cycles. The same thing with emunah. The more a person builds their emunah, the more emunah they'll have. The more a person weakens their emunah, the weaker their emunah will be. And so you'll find people that have especially in the Baal Tshuva community, people that like are tzaddikim, like super tzaddikim. And then a couple of years later, they're the biggest apikoursim you've ever met. biggest anti-religious, can't stand religion. I was crazy. I was out of my mind. I was in a cult. So that's because the cycles are very extreme. The way to grow in your connection with Hashem is like cholent. Really, really slow. So slow that you don't realize that everything turned brown. You put it in, it looked fine. 20 hours later, or whatever it is, 16 hours later, completely changed. That's how slow it has to be. No quick anything. And when a person's working in their emunah, they have to work on it slowly and slowly and slowly. And if they start to see that it's dropping, don't let it drop fast. You let it drop slowly and then work on getting it back up. So there's emunah that builds emunah. Kanal is mentioned above. This comes from the 613 commandments, which are advices. Ba lidei emunah. They come through emunah. And then when a person has this level of emunah, and the level of emunah that we reached was shouting from your heart, crying out from the deepest place of the heart, shehem v'fu'ot tfilot v'schut avot, kshe nofelet ha'emunah hem einam meilot, that we said before, person is suffering, and medication or treatment and davening and the merit of our ancestors, none of this is helping because their level of emunah has fallen. Al yedei ha'itzot shemigadlot et ha'emunah hem moilot, then through the advice, meaning the advice that you're going to find in your heart, meaning the 613 commandments, which grow emunah, then it becomes effective. Ki ha'itzot im b'chinat peler, because this type of advice is connected to wonder. B'chinat, right? You know the word for cell phone is pelephone, wonderful. Because Wonder Woman should have been Pele Isha, yes. Okay, B'chinat odeh shimcha ki asita pele etzot me'achok. That's what this is the quote that he started with. That I am going to thank you in your name that you made this wondrous thing, this advice that can come from far away, and this advice that can build emunah. So now he's working on the first part of this. Shaveh etzot nikaot pele. The advice is called wonder. Ki al yedei ha'itzat tova na'aseh lo pele. Because when a person receives good advice, it's like a wondrous thing. Right? For them, they couldn't see how to get out of some situation. Someone gives them good advice, or they connect with the Torah in a way that it pulls them out of their consciousness and they're able to see things in a new light. It's like a wondrous thing. Sheyachol lif'ol davar she'aya mufla mimenu v'lo yachol haya la'asoto. That something could happen that for the person it would seem like it was a miracle, it was a wondrous thing, and that it would have been impossible for that to happen. And that's why this advice is called a wonder. That fixes and builds a person's emunah, and they receive a healing from the things that are hurting them, that seems like something that can't be healed in a wondrous way. Which is connected to what's said in Tehillim, V'hifla Hashem et makotecha v'chulei v'chalaim ra'im v'ne'emanim. That Hashem was wondrous in His plagues, and there were these terrible afflictions that came about v'ne'emanim, and they were the ones that ne'emanim davka, that had faith, specifically shenit be'er le'il, as explained above, shehem ba'im mechemat pagam ha'emunah. They come about because of a lack of faith, the damaging of the person's faith. V'lachem shenit kana ha'emunah lidei ha'etzot. And then, when a person's faith is fixed through connecting to the Torah in an honest way and doing the mitzvot, then the person automatically receives a healing from the affliction or the sickness. Meaning that you can reach a place of this wondrous jumping forward that you never could have had before when you're doing mitzvot from a place of emunah. There's only one more line here, but if I want to try to connect this. So let's say a person, I want to make it the simplest as possible. I was bring it back to usually to money because it's the simplest thing. Person doesn't have money, like my friend. He doesn't even want to give 10 avot. The way in order for him to grow in his emunah is to follow only in this realm the example of Ruti. Give 100 shekels. It might have been 100 shekels more than he could have ever thought about, but do it from a place of emunah. And say, Hashem, I'm giving you this 100 shekels. I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm not expecting anything. Here's the 100 shekels for tzedakah. Let's go. I'm going to look for work. At that point, Hashem, it opens a conduit for Hashem to give the person something that for them was wondrous, that they didn't imagine they could have received. And it might not be in the world of Gashmiut. It might not be in the physical world. It might not be that if you have no money and you give 100 shekels, that you're now going to get 100,000 shekels. It might just be that you saw someone in the elevator and you said to him shalom, and it turned out that that guy was very depressed. And because you said to him shalom, you made him happy. And you might think, well, I really could have used that 100 shekels. I don't really care about that guy. But your soul cares about that guy, and Hashem cares about that guy. And the way that what Hashem gave you in that opportunity was 2 doors. One, keep your mouth shut. The other one, to say shalom. And when you said shalom to that guy, you got a reward that was worth much more than 100 shekels. We're not always able to see this, but that's how Hashem is running the world. That's like a tiny little bubble in how Hashem is running the world. And your job is not to figure out how things are going to work out. Your job is to daven and ask Hashem to help you. And sometimes you have to say, like if somebody says to you, hey, I want to give you 10,000 shekels. And then they don't give it to you. So you call them and say, you wanted to give me 10,000 shekels. That you can do. But that it'll come to that point where the money will come to you, or, let's say there's a business deal. I want to hire you for 10,000 shekels. You can call them and say, you wanted to hire me. Let's go. When are we going to start the work? But don't worry about where that 10,000 shekels is going to come from. You do the mitzvot from a place of emunah, and let Hashem figure out the rest. And you might have to sit in shul, and I've done this myself many times, including not so long ago, and just say to Hashem, I don't know what to do. I simply didn't leave shul. I was probably in shul for 3 hours. Just sitting there kind of staring at the wall, saying to Hashem, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I have all of these problems. I don't know what to do. And then, you know what happens? That you turn a corner, and you see a different road, and you try something else, and new opportunities and new things come all the time. Okay, and that's the pele here. That's the wonder. Gam tefillah b'chinat plaot. Also, davening is wondrous. It's connected to wonder. B'chinat ketuv, he's going to give a quote here. Noati lo tesefele. This we say in Sefer Shmot. You are wondrous in your praises. You do wonders, or awesome in your praises. You do wonders. Harei shehatihila hi tefillah hi gam ken b'chinat pele. Praising Hashem is also type of davening. It's also wondrous. Ve'al yedei haitzot ha-nikraot pele ha-mikayamot et ha-emunah yachol להתפלל תפילה שגם כן נקראת pele. You are allowed to say a prayer that seems impossible. You're allowed to ask for things that seem impossible. You don't have to be very specific, but you can say, Hashem, I don't want to have to worry about finances. I don't want to have to, I've got other things to focus on. I've got to focus on my health right now. I have to focus on my family right now. I have to focus on learning Torah, teaching Torah, doing whatever it is. And Hashem, this burden of finances right now, I don't want to carry. For me, that would be like a wondrous thing, beyond anything. Or, God forbid, if a person is really sick, and their prayer would be, Hashem, I want to dance out of this hospital. I want to go out of this hospital. I want to be completely healed. For them, that would be a wondrous thing. He's saying, you can ask for those things in davening. Shetitkaben tfilato ve'terape mecholiav. That the person's prayer can be answered, received, and they'll be healed from their sickness. V'chein zchut avot nikra, and so the last thing says also the merit of our ancestors is called Pele. Is going to give a quote for that. Neged avotam asa Pele, juxtaposed to our ancestors, he did a miracle. Sharei zchut avot hi b'chinat Pele. The merit of our ancestors is a wonder. V'gam kan habi'o kanal, and also explanation for this is from above. She'alidei ha'etzot nikrot Pele v'mekaramot emunah. So still, this in the merit of our ancestors is still coming from a place of emunah. Yechol liskot lechach sheto'ir lo zchut avot shetitrape mecholiyav. It might be that a person would heal just in the merit of their ancestors. So, for example, Aryeh's father, Zichrono Levacha, passed away, and I guarantee you, Aryeh, that your father is davening for you all the time. Anything that can possibly be done in Shemayim, your father is storming the gates of heaven for you all the time. And I know, for me, for sure, Reb Shalom, I know, because I feel it, and I have dreams with him sometimes, and I have, I don't know, if visions is kind of a strange thing to say, but it's not like visions, but I picture him in my mind, and I picture him davening for me, and I really know, in my soul, I know he's there davening for me. That's the zchut avot. We also can go all the way back to the great ancestors of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, all of them. We all have a zchut that comes from there, and from there a person can be healed as well. Okay, I know it's heavy stuff, especially when we go for such a long time. It's hard. That's why I always try to say, we're reaching here, we're going to get there. Okay, this is a little story from, and I might end up on my podcast eventually, but I didn't yet, from this guy, Rebbe Nachman Yitzchak Pinson, who was born in 5645. What is that? I don't know. You know 5645?
Well, we're 57 now. So
120, 30 years ago?
And then he died in 5702. So, in 1940 or something like that. He died. He died in the Gulag. He was arrested by the communists, and he died 3 years later in the Gulag. That's tough. So it says he wasn't very successful in business. He didn't have a lot of money, and he struggled to put food on the table, and he worked long hours. But his children's chinuch, and he felt like his children's chinuch, meaning their religious education, was being overlooked. In his town, there was no cheder, no religious education, and all of the kids were sent to Soviet schools. And his family told him, don't worry, because everybody's going to be secular eventually, nobody's going to be religious anymore, so it doesn't really matter. But it really pained him that his children didn't have a Torah education, and he decided that when he had enough money, he was going to send his kids to religious schools. And after coming back from he went on a long business trip. He came back and he saw, being away, his kids were in really bad shape. They were hanging out with non-Jewish kids. They weren't wearing their kippot. They weren't wearing tzitziot. They weren't davening. They didn't care about anything. And he realized this is really a problem. So he said, what kind of life is this if my children are not religious Jews? And he didn't know what to do. He didn't have any money. And the closest yeshiva was in Kharkov, which we now know about because of the war in Ukraine, which is 500 kilometers away. So he had a gold watch, and he sold it. He sold everything that he had. He told his wife that he's going to take their 10-year-old and 12-year-old sons to yeshiva. And she was not happy about it. And her family came, and his family came, and they told him he's out of his mind. And the family also said, don't you know that the government is shutting down yeshivot? So you're going to take all the money you have and send your kids to yeshiva, and then a few weeks later they're going to shut it down. Why don't you get your kids to go get a secular education? They become doctors, engineers, they'll have a future. But this Rebbe Nachman Yitzchak, he said to his wife, we have to take our sons to yeshiva, but we're not going to have religious kids. And she understood it, and with a heavy heart, she packed up food and clothing and wished them a tearful goodbye. Which reminds me, I watched Fiddler on the Roof, and there he says goodbye to one of his daughters sitting at the train station. It's very sad to see. If you're a father, it's very sad to see. So they traveled for 3 days. They arrived in Kharkov, and there they found the yeshiva staff panic-stricken. None of the students were in the yeshiva. Everybody had fled because they knew the government was coming to inspect, and they were going to shut down the yeshiva. And when the police showed up and they didn't see any students there, so they left everyone alone. And so this guy, he traveled, 500 kilometers. He sold everything he had. He had his wife say goodbye to his little boys, and he said, I'm staying here for as long as it takes until you reopen the yeshiva. And 3 weeks later, they found a new location. They reopened the yeshiva. He paid for their tuition and left his boys there. And these boys started thriving in the yeshiva. And they became excited about learning Torah, and they became outstanding students and influenced the rest of the family, their younger brothers and their sister. And eventually, they became a shining example of Torah, Avodah, and Tzedakah, just like he wanted. Now, that's the story, and it just shows you the Mesilut Nefesh that people have to have. That, I'll tell you, back then it was easier. Because I have kids, still young kids at home, and it's not easy to keep these kids connected to Torah and mitzvot in this day and age. Smartphones, social media, and even if you don't give your kid a smartphone and they're not connected to social media, their friends are. And it's not an easy thing. I'll just share one more thing, short story here. This is from the mayor of Kfar Chabad, Shlomo Maidanchik. He had, make a long story short, he went for Yechidus with the Rebbe, at a private audience with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said to him, the guy is too serious and depressed. And he said, you need to be more joyful. And the guy said, okay, I'll work on it. And the Rebbe said, no, now. You need to start being joyful now. So he said, okay. And the Rebbe smiled. Here it says, a broad, beautiful smile. And he says, no, give me a smile as a personal gift. Pinch your cheeks and be happy. No, as you stand here now, smile. So you can imagine, of course, the guy pinched his cheeks and made himself happy for the Rebbe as a personal gift. This little tiny short story shows you how sweet the Rebbe was. Here the Rebbe is meeting thousands and thousands of people. Everyone's got their story. People writing letters to him. He got more letters than anyone in the United States when he was alive. Back then people wrote letters. And here he cares enough about this guy that he's sad, and he says, give me a smile as a personal gift. Just pinch your cheeks. The Rebbe is so sweet and so pure and so righteous. Really, that's a real Rebbe. And I'm telling you, there aren't Rebbes like that anymore. Maybe one day there will be, but this Rebbe was really something special. So, the merit of being connected to these Rebbes, we should, all of our prayers should be answered without Hashem. Simcha, and I'll just say, Refuah Shlema to everyone. And, easy birth to everyone who's pregnant and supposed to give birth, B'ezrat Hashem, and good shidduch for everyone that's looking to get married, B'ezrat Hashem, parnasa and health. watching. Turn off the phone.